All right, take 3. Hey there, folks. Welcome back. Having a little bit of technical difficulties this morning. Most of that is the fan's fault. Not the fan's fault, but the fan's fault. It's hot today, even though it's late October. And I've got the fan going because it's stuffy and humid here in the shop. And I had my target that I was using for reference over here in the corner just swinging back and forth, and it messes with the autofocus on my camera. So in an effort to mitigate that, I took it down. And if you're still watching after that rant, thanks for sticking around. Also, I'm a little bit congested this week, and sorry for that. So I might be clearing my throat a little bit or whatever in this production. So with that being said, hunting season starts for rifle hunters in Texas in a week or so. I'm sure for most parts of the country, the timeline is similar. Now, most folks who go rifle hunting do not practice with their rifles on a regular basis throughout the year. Some do, and I appreciate that. But with rifle season right around the corner, before you take your rifle out on that hunt, I implore you, take that rifle to the range and make sure that it's hitting where you want it to. It's ethical, and it'll save you a lot of aggravation in the long run. I realize ammunition in most cases is expensive, and in some cases is hard to come by depending on what you're shooting, but you owe it to yourself as well as the animal you're pointing that thing at to make a well-placed and ethical shot. So take your rifle out to shoot it. Depending on where you're taking your rifle to do your sight in for the hunt, you may or may not have to come up with something to put your targets on. A good example I will use is the range that I prefer to use the most, which is Trinity Armory in Cleveland, Texas. It is in relative close proximity to where I reside, and from a expensive standpoint, it's about the best deal in the area for what you get. And for the most part, as long as you're not acting the fool, they just leave you alone, which is great. That being said, if you're rifle hunting, or even if you're pistol hunting, you're kind of sort of on your own for anything that you want to affix your targets to. They do have some very basic stands on the pistol side, which consist of a base with a couple of furring strips sticking up out of it. And if there's any wind at all, if you're just trying to hang a paper target on that, it's going to tear off and aggravate you. Also on the rifle side, they've got chicken wire stretched up with clothespins, which is great, except for if there's any wind blowing, it's going to blow your targets around. So you really need a solid backer at that location. And I mention that because that's the case in a lot of places. So with that being said, I'm a cheapskate when it comes to what I'm shooting at. I prefer to spend my budget money on guns and ammo, training, not so much on the backer that I'm putting my targets on. So I'm always looking for something like a flat piece of cardboard or whatever to use as a target backer. Now, you want something that's a little thicker than just a standard sheet of cardboard because, well, basically you want something that's going to hold up to getting shot at and lugged around, drug around, carried in your pickup, whatever. I had this hanging up, but the fan was blowing it around. This is my normal rifle target backer that I built. I'll turn it around so you can see what's going on here. Obviously, I've been shooting at this thing for a long time. This is just a little wooden frame that I made out of a scrap fence picket, and I clamp it to the wooden frame out at the range, and it makes it very rigid. And on this particular stand, you'll notice I've got a 16 by 16 rifle sight-in target sitting here. And while in a perfect world, you'd take your rifle out, you'd shoot at the target, you'd make that shot, you'd make a mild adjustment to your scope, you'd shoot again, and then for good measure, you'd shoot again. That would be an optimal scenario. But especially if you're shooting a rifle that you're not familiar with, you're shooting a rifle that has a new scope on it, you're trying some new ammunition because you couldn't get the old stuff, whatever the case may be, I strongly suggest that while this is adequate for most things, you have something behind your target that sticks out a little bit on either side. I'm not saying you need something the size of a barn door, but something like this piece of cardboard right here is really nice to put behind a target of this size, just in case you're further off than 8 inches to either side of zero And I'm not saying that's because you made a bad shot. I'm saying because maybe you're just that far off. And that way, if you shoot and it's off paper, you can still find it on the backer and know how to make your adjustments. A good example of that I'll show you here is with that 243 that we had so much difficulty finding a load that it liked. With the last ammunition that I tried, this was my point of aim. And this was that first group that I shot, which turned out to be a very good group, and it was certainly on paper. But can you imagine if it would have been just a little bit further off to the side? Man, I'd have never known where those went. So learn from that, and if possible, give yourself a little extra space. When I make another one of these stands, instead of making it 16 inches wide, I'm going to try to make it 24 inches wide, and that way I'll have just a little bit more backer behind my target in case I run across a situation like that. So now, you don't have to make a wooden frame like that. I could clip a piece of cardboard that was heavy enough up and achieve similar results in most circumstances. The example I'll give you here now is this piece of cardboard, and I'll put up a picture of it here on the screen so you can see it real good. Been using this one for a good long while. It's a heavy box that a DeWalt tool came in, so it made a good starting point for a target. And we actually had this side by side and hit a couple of reduced silhouettes on it the other day. That's why it's all shot up on this piece of paper. But the thing about this one, if I was going to take this out there and use it today, even if I had that target right in the middle, I'd have a hard time knowing where my shot went if it wasn't on paper because of all these old target holes. So what I like to do in preparation for range day is take something like this back home with me from my last trip, and then before my next trip to the range, I like to take something like this old Dr. Pepper box or this lasagna box, flatten it out because it's got a nice clean inside on it, and I just like to lay it out over my target frame and glue it on. Now you could staple it on if you wanted to, but then it's liable to come off, so glue really does work better. You can just take a little Elmer's glue, go back and forth on it, lay it on, put a couple of books on it, let it dry for a couple hours, and it'll be good to go next time. In this particular case, I have a can of headliner spray that, while is expensive and often hard to come by, I've found that headliner spray does not store well, and I already had that can, and rather than letting it go bad sitting on the shelf, I just decided to use it up and glue some new cardboards onto my existing target frame to prepare me for my next range set. What I like to do is just take a razor blade. You can use a razor knife, and I've got one right over there, but I just took a new razor blade off the rack. And I like to cut these boxes and remove all these little dorky pieces from the edge. One thing that I'll point out to you, don't spray this inside your shop. You're going to get it on everything. Take this outside and spray it. I'm going to do that right now. I'll be right back. So now, after covering the entire surface of this cardboard with spray glue, I'm just going to take these cardboard boxes and laminate them over it. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. For what we're doing, this is merely to give us a clean blackboard, if you will, to write our answers on. I oversprayed down here at the end a little bit. I didn't technically need to use that part, but I think I can use these pieces that I cut off here. And that part will be okay. Looks pretty good. So now that I got all that covering it, I'm just going to flip it upside down, try and do it without hitting my microphone. I'm going to put some weight on top of it to pin it down with. Now, I'm sure most of you probably already had that figured out before I made the video, and this was probably of little use to you, but for somebody who's just trying to figure things out, little things like having a nice clean piece of cardboard behind your target so that if you miss the target, you can tell where it went, really do save in frustration. They help to keep you from wasting ammunition when you're out there. Now, if you're using a rifle you're either not familiar with or one that you have just put a new scope on or whatever, what I recommend is that you have it bore sighted before you take it to the range so that you can be as close as possible to being on paper in the first place. The easiest way to do that without any special tools if you're hunting with a bolt action rifle is simply put your rifle in whatever you're going to be using as a rest, remove the bolt, look down through the bore at your target at about 25 yards away, and if the middle of your target is visible through the middle of your bore, without touching or moving the rifle, raise your head up and look through the scope. And if the crosshairs on the scope are also in round about the same area, you should be okay to be on paper at 25 yards. So once you've zeroed your rifle on paper at 25 yards, move it out to 100, and don't expect the same point of impact. Expect in most cases for your shots to be a little bit higher, so make sure you have some room above your point of impact at 25 to work with so you can see where those rounds are going to go. And that brings us back to why having a paper bigger than your target behind your target is a good idea. Now, you could certainly buy oversized targets to shoot at, but those cost money. With something like this, you could get away with just putting a black dot on the cardboard with a Sharpie, and now you're out all of whatever it cost you to put together your cardboard backing for a target. I've done that plenty of times. As you can see here, we were using those little colored yard sale marker stickers for target points in this situation. A target like this isn't real expensive, but they're going to cost you $1 or so a piece. But as you can see here, they're not completely necessary depending on what your objective may be. Another good source of cardboard for your target backers is things like this Papa John's lid. Now, you don't want the ones that are all covered in grease, but as long as they're pretty much clean, you can save those, and they're actually just almost exactly the right size for the back of one of these. So I'm going to wrap it up for now. If you got anything at all out of this, if it made you think, you know what, that's not a bad idea, or this guy's smoking crack, whatever it may be, let me know in the comment section down below. Try to keep the comments as PG-13 as you can, because there are people with kids that read and watch these things. I'd love to hear what you say. In the meantime, take care. God bless.